Om Dyo Shanti Antariksham Shanti Prithvi Shanti Apaha Shanti Oshadaya Shanti Vanaspataya Shanti Vishve Devaha Shanti Brahma Shanti Sarvam Shanti Shanti Reva Shanti Sama Shantir Eti Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May peace radiate in the whole sky, as well as in the vast ethereal space everywhere. May peace reign all over this earth, in the water, the herbs, and the tree. May peace flow over the whole universe. May peace emanate from the Supreme Being. May there be peace and peace alone. Om, peace, peace, peace beyond all of us. Thank you. There are a lot of people suffering now. I serve at UCSD in the hospital, and I go there and I see so many people from the COVIDs, the influenza A. I also happen to be, my parents live in LA, and I happened to be there when the fires were going on. And there's just a lot of people that are in a lot of pain and suffering. So just if you can, just visualize your heart filled with light and just emanating all over the world, sending thoughts of peace, love, and wellness to each and every being, from humans to animals to insects to everything that has been challenged in our times. So, welcome here, everyone. For those that are new, this is the San Diego Monastery. We are part of the Vedanta tradition, and our speaker is a well-known Vedanta speaker. He is Peter Bolland. He is really sort of a very, teaches comparative religions and philosophy at Southwestern College, and is just I find is someone who's very uplifting. He has a sense of presence that I feel as you tap into what he says, you'll feel a sense of calmness and interconnectedness with things all around you. I find him just a great, he's also a spiritual activist as well. So he embodies what he teaches. A great person and individual. We're very lucky to have him. So today he'll be speaking on nature as neighbor, expanding our sense of our sacred community. And we will feel what that means. There's a Swami who I knew, Swami Shraddhananda, who would tell me that he actually would see the presence of the divine light, not only within himself, but then he'd start to see the divine presence of that light in other beings, other human beings. He would talk to the animals and see that same divine light in the animals, birds. We would walk in the gardens and he would see that same divine light shining in and through every plant. And he would actually talk to the plants and trees as we were walking into the garden. So it's just that same ultimate Vedanta. We talk about the same consciousness, one underlying consciousness. And each object is just like a wave in that ocean. So we were just tapping into our own inner consciousness to see our own divine light. And once we see that light, then we can start to see the light of everything around us. So we want to thank Peter today for coming and sharing this talk with us. It'll be a PowerPoint presentation. It'll be about an hour talk, and then we'll have Q&A afterwards. Peter Bolland.
Oh my, what an introduction. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you. I'm going to go ahead and take my vest off here, which means I'm making myself vulnerable. I'm exposing myself. You know, the word vest, the English word vest comes from the Roman goddess Vesta, who is the goddess of protection. And so the word vest, you may have noticed this already, is the same word as investment. You know, we shoring up some kind of defense around us. So symbolically removing my vest lets you know that I'm really here for you 100%. No, but I'm just thrilled to be here. Thank you, Swami, for hosting today. And thank you to our beautiful musicians. You're singing and playing. It's just what a perfect selection too as well. I couldn't have chosen better. So this talk, Nature is Neighbor, expanding our sense of sacred community, was commissioned. I'll be honest with you, I've given this before. I trying to think back exactly when this was. I'm thinking maybe September of last fall. The good folks at First United Methodist Church in Mission Valley have a school there called School of Christian Studies, and I've been speaking there every fall as part of their annual curriculum around a theme these last few years called Who is My Neighbor? And that references, of course, the Good Samaritan story, which I want to share with you as soon as we get started here. But we've done it a couple of different themes. A couple of years ago, we talked about immigration and how we treat other people. And then this last year, they wanted to think about the environment and thinking about all living beings, and in fact, the biosphere itself as our neighbor. What are our moral obligations to that? So when Swami invited me to be here today, I thought maybe this inquiry that I'm inviting you on might be a good fit here in this community. So go ahead and go to the next slide, please. And we'll get the whole thing to kind of come up here. And in the meantime, yeah, good, perfect. So I'm gonna take a risk here and share with you a really, really familiar story. If I just said the Good Samaritan story, you'd be like, yeah, I've heard it. Or I've had it rammed down my throat in Sunday school, or I've never heard of it before. So I just want to get us all on the same page here. This is such a rich idea. So do I need to be behind this to be on the Zoom mic, or can I roam around?
You want to roam around?
I wouldn't mind, because then I could see the slide a little bit better.
Sure, yeah.
Like the Q&A mic that we're going to use. Can I just?
Yeah.
We got it over here. He's free. Oh, perfect. Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm all set, Swami. Thank you. Your crack audiovisual team was on the job, so. So, yeah, I guess there was a camera issue, huh? Let me try to stay in this general area. I don't have to stand over there. That makes it better, because we're zooming this to folks all over the solar system. So, okay, so for all you Bible nerds, Luke 10, 25 to 37. This is a classic Jesus story where a Pharisee, which this text translates as lawyer, comes to Jesus and says, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus said to him, "What does it say in the book?" You know, it's a classic philosophy professor thing. Did you do your reading? Don't bring me questions that are answered in the reading that I just assigned to you. So Jesus says, well, what is written in the law? What do you read there? Law meaning Torah, right? The first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. So being a well-educated Jew, he says, off the top of his head, he quotes the line from Leviticus, which says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And then Jesus said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this and you will live." But being a good philosophy student, the lawyer has a follow-up. Instead of, okay, dutifully following the scripture, I have a question. Who is my neighbor? That's the right question, isn't it? What does it mean to love our neighbors as ourselves? There's a lot to unpack here. We could do 90 minutes just on this slide, but we're not. gonna carry on. So next slide, please. How does Jesus answer the question? Does he answer the question by explaining at great length to this man, well, here's what I mean by neighbor? No, he does what Jesus often does. He just pivots to a story. Let me tell you a little story. Jesus says, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers. Now, a little footnote here. This road from Jerusalem to Jericho at this time is a notoriously dangerous road. You took your life in your hands when you tried to travel on this road. That's a context his audience would know that we don't know. So right away, they feel the sense of suspense and peril about this journey. So, yep, guess what? He gets jumped by muggers who strip him, beat him, and they went away, leaving him half dead. Now, by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side of the road. So likewise, so that's the first guy. So likewise did a Levite. When he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side of the road. But a Samaritan, it's like a joke, right? A priest, an imam, and a rabbi walk into a bar. So we got a priest, a Levite, and a Samaritan. So here comes the Samaritan. Watch what happens. And the Samaritan, while traveling, came near him and saw him, and when he saw him, he was moved to pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on him. This guy travels with oil and wine in his rucksack. He's ready to do first aid. Then he put him on his own animal and brought him to the inn and took care of him. And the next day, when he took out his visa and gave it to the innkeeper and said, take care of him. And when I come back, I will repay you what more you spend. And then Jesus says to the audience, or to this man that's asking him these questions, which of these three, it's such a rhetorical question, right? Which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? And the Pharisee, the lawyer, says, the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said, go and do likewise. Which is a line Jesus uses a lot at the end of stories, like with the adulterous woman in John 8. You know, where did everybody go? Well, everybody's gone. Well, you should go too and sin no more. Just leave. And so this has come down to us as the Good Samaritan story. One more bit of context. This is a Jewish audience in this story. The Pharisee and Jesus are both Jews. They're inside of that tradition. And it just so happens at that time that the Hebrews had a blood feud going with the Samaritans. So the Samaritans, again, that context is totally lost to us. So whoever your favorite evil people are, Nazis. But the story just doesn't have the same juice when you call it the good Nazi. But imagine the people whom the Hebrews fear and loathe the most because of real violence that has gone on between these communities. So everybody in the audience knows that the Samaritan is a bad guy. It's really shocking how seditious this story is, how radical this story is, how disruptive, how upending this story is. Jesus is absolutely shattering the ethnocentrism of his audience and challenging them. And the good Jews, the priest and the Levite, he throws under the bus. They're the people who misunderstood their mission. So this story's come down to us, you know, for all these years now as an illustration of our moral commitment to universal interdependence, loving kindness, above and beyond all social, tribal boundaries. It's a portrait of universal care. And so that seemed like a good jumping off point. Go ahead and move on to the next slide. So this image here reminds us that compassion is dangerous and sacrificial and uncomfortable and costly and not only does it put you in danger in that moment, but it puts you at odds with your own community, who will now view this person as a kind of enemy, who, because of his helpfulness. Go ahead, go to that next slide. So using this, and fill that little space there, a couple more clicks. So this is the jumping off point for us today. Obviously, nature as neighbor is an invitation to kind of think about these possibilities. My favorite 20th century Jewish philosopher, theologian, professor, rabbi, political activist, he marched with Dr. King, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, has this really interesting line: religion begins with a consciousness that something is asked of us. That's a universal theme in religion. Religion just isn't about assuaging my fear, making me feel good, getting me my personal salvation so that I get to go to the good place in the afterlife. That's not Heschel's view. Religion begins with a calling. I think there's another line on this slide as well. I had to go to John Muir. Since this is a picture of Yosemite in our beautiful Sierras here in California, John Muir felt that calling in regards to his relationship with nature. Some of you know the backstory on John Muir. We should probably come in and do a whole day on him one time. Scottish immigrant, came to America as a boy with his whole family. His father had kind of beaten into him a very conservative Christian religious upbringing. But John Muir left home and came out west and fell in love with the Sierra Nevadas. And if you've read John Muir, you know that he is a classic nature mystic. He doesn't talk much about religion, but the way he talks about the Sierra Nevada mountains, you feel it just pouring off the page, this absolute reverence. And that every encounter for him is an encounter with the divine. There's a famous story where on a really, he lived by himself in Yosemite before any other white people got there. And on a very stormy day, all the Douglas firs and the spruce and the pine trees are going like this. He climbed up in a tree just so he could swing back and forth. He wanted to feel the storm in his bones. So that's what we're talking about with John Muir. Go ahead and move to the next slide. And then fill up that spot for me. A couple of clicks. So what's at stake? That's always an interesting question that I think about when we begin an inquiry like this. So if the core Christian message is radical care for all who suffer and not merely personal salvation, then what happens when we expand the meaning of neighbor to include all of creation, the plants and animals and the biosphere that supports them? So in the face of our current climate crisis, we're challenged more urgently than ever. Do our religious ideologies draw our attention to the hereafter or to the here and now? How might Christianity contribute to the crucial work of natural restoration? And in mainline American Christianity, this question has probably more urgency than it does in a spiritual community like this one. Because Christianity, in the way it's been institutionalized and propagated throughout the last 2,000 years here in the West, was often at the expense of the natural world. That there is baked into much of mainstream Christianity a kind of dualistic dismissal of the material world as a lower order of being, put here by God for our consumption. And our real home is in the afterlife. And that ideology has endangered the natural world as Christianity has become one of the central operating systems of Western civilization. That nature was viewed, commonly anyway, only for its instrumental value, not its inherent value. In other words, a forest was valued for how many board feet of timber I can get out of it, and the ocean is valued for how much fish I can extract from it until all the fish are gone. And Jesus is coming back any minute now anyway, so we don't have to worry about environmental stewardship. And that kind of Christianity, which isn't everybody's kind, but there it is. Go ahead and push forward there. So what good is caring for others in this Good Samaritan sense if we're not also caring for the world that sustains us all? Go ahead and move on. So, and put the whole thing up for me. So primordial memories, I don't know, this seemed like a good place to start, that over the course of our entire human adventure, this whole hundreds of thousands of years journey, we've spent 99% of our time outdoors. And I wasn't there, you weren't there, but we can speculate about how different our life has been from the way it is now. You know, 100 years ago, we invented electric lights and illuminated everything, and now we live largely through screens. But for almost all of human existence, none of that was the case. And so it's obvious, it seems to me, that as a human species, our first spiritual experiences were in nature. And religion came much, much later, if by religion you mean these organized systems, not religious experience itself, but the systems and institutions and doctrines and teachings and hierarchies. All of that comes later. Now, if you mean the root, but if you mean the root original meaning of the word religion from the Greek religio and the Latin religare, then you get a different narrative. Those words mean literally to connect, to link back, and to join together. So religious systems, whichever one you care to name, have at their root then this mission of connecting us together with each other in communities, connecting us to the cosmos, and connecting us to the deepest, most essential elements of ourselves. Whatever you think of when you think about connection, isn't that what the purpose of religion is? When we come into a beautiful sacred space like the San Diego Monastery, whether in worship or in meditation or in the kind of dialogue we're having here in this session, or whether you go into any church or synagogue or Buddhist sangha, whatever, or a sweat lodge on on the reservation, all of these flavors root back to this essential longing that we all have to come out of our isolation, our alienation, our loneliness, our confusion, and come into a space where maybe we don't find all the answers, but the painful urgency of the questions softens a little bit in the experience of community that we have with the natural world, with each other. And so religious systems, one way Joseph Campbell thinks about this is that religious systems, again, whichever one you care to name, are not the ultimate stage. They are the penultimate, which means second to the last. That mythology and religion, Joseph Campbell argues, are not the destination. You don't just sort of become a member of a religious community and then go, all right, I'm done. Instead, what if we thought about it this way? That our spiritual practices and our spiritual communities are jumping off points. They get us to the edge, but then there's still a final stage, which is to leap, Campbell says, to leap into that which is nameless, that which has no boundary, that which is beyond doctrines, beyond rituals, beyond traditions, beyond culture, beyond ethnicity, beyond tribe, beyond space, beyond time. No words, no concepts. That's the ultimate experience. That's the universal mystical experience of all the traditions. And people like Ramakrishna and Vivekananda brought this tradition to America. Well, Vivekananda did, and inspired by Ramakrishna, and then Yogananda Paramahansa and the self-realization community, and about 100 years ago, brought that Indian spirituality here to this part of the world. And a lot of that connected with all of this. So there's another point or two on this. Yeah.
So the ultimate or final stage then, beyond our practices and doctrines and ideologies, is reunification. That experience of oneness, the realization of oneness, beyond the categories of understanding. Go ahead and go to the next, please. So, in the Zen tradition, many of you know this story, but in the Zen tradition, it is told that the Buddha, the Shakyamuni Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama of the Shakyamuni clan, 5th century BC, India, you know, the Buddha. Not all the later Buddhas, but the Buddha. The Zen story is that one day the Buddha gathered his company together to give a Dharma talk, as he frequently did. But on this day, he simply held up a flower and didn't say a word. And it was awkward. And people were looking at each other and like, when's this talk gonna start? You know, is he having a stroke? Should we get some help? But he just held this flower, and only one man, the story goes, Kashyapa, signaled with his eyes that he understood what was being said. Now, as a philosophy professor, I'm gonna ruin it all by trying to figure out what Buddha was trying to say with words and concepts, because I'm not Kashyapa. And maybe you're not either. You're wondering, what's the lesson here? What's the understanding that Buddha is attempting to convey? Maybe, as the Zen Buddhist tradition later codifies this story, a guy called Bodhidharma, who's the first patriarch of Zen Buddhism that brings Buddhism into China, says that Zen Buddhism is a tradition outside of the scriptures, beyond words and letters. It's about the realization of Buddhahood or Buddha consciousness within oneself. And so by holding up this flower, later Buddhist teachers like the wonderful Thich Nhat Hanh, who we just lost a couple of years ago, often did the same thing. You can find all kinds of YouTubes of him holding up flowers. Sometimes he held up a piece of paper and kind of made the same point. Is this a piece of paper? Or is this the rain that fell on a mountainside outside of Eugene, Oregon, where this Douglas fir tree grew that was then harvested? Or is this the gasoline in the chainsaw of the lumberjack who took the tree down? Or is this the dentist who keeps the lumberjack's teeth in good shape? Is this the soil? Is this the gravity that pulls the rain to the earth? Is this the sun? And of course, you could just go on for years with a list like that and the realization of what Thich Nhat Hanh called interbeing. That flower the Buddha held up has no separate existence. It does not exist without the sun and the rain and the florist who sold you the flower and everything else. Go ahead and advance, please. Yeah, put up this whole slide. So there's a doctrine in Buddhism that might help us with our inquiry called interdependent origination. I know it's a mouthful, and I won't bore you with it in Sanskrit or Pali either. But this idea of interdependent origination is, for me, a kind of a doorway into sanctifying not only nature, but the floor beneath my feet and the dust on my desk at home and everything else. So in Buddhist metaphysics, all of reality, all energy, all consciousness, and all matter is understood as one interdependent field. And all of it is imbued with Dharmakaya, sometimes called Buddha consciousness, Buddha mind. These are all just attempts to name the nameless, to say the ineffable. So what if this is true, that all being, like white light through a prism, breaks up into different frequencies? So over here's consciousness, over here's light, over here's matter. And it's all coming from one singular source. This is, of course, the essence of Advaita Vedanta too, or any non-dualistic system like Buddhism. So everything that happens, every election, every flower, every weed, every thought, every seed that comes into fruition to feed us, everything that arises in a dynamic field of mutual causation. And there are certain ramifications if you follow this view to its conclusion that, well, then nothing has a single cause. Everything is causing everything else. And I know you've noticed that. I'm really interested in politics and sociology and social justice and environmentalism and all kinds of other pressing concerns. And you and I know how vexing it is to answer a question like, what is the cause of poverty? Oh, well, it's something. And we just write a law to fix that one thing, then we will erase poverty. And I went to a talk yesterday at Southwestern College. The spring semester starts on Monday. And so all of us teachers went into a big training session. And we had these wonderful presenters, and they talked about ACE, adverse childhood experiences. Whether a child has witnessed a murder, whether a child had an alcoholic parent, whether a child's parents divorced, whether a child experienced violence against themselves in the community, whether they were sexually abused, et cetera, et cetera. And social scientists track all these things. And if you had a really great, safe childhood and two loving parents and everything was amazing, your life is going to go a lot better. You're going to make better financial decisions. You have like an 80% less chance to become an alcoholic or a drug addict yourself. It is phenomenal. And so how impactful, and this is all in the word karma, isn't it? In our tradition around here. That all of these causations of the context around you contribute to the formation of what you or what a society becomes. Is there an unatoned for moral cancer in the heart of the identity of the United States of America because of centuries of unacknowledged, unpaid for, enslaved labor? Not to mention the genocide against indigenous people. Do those things lurk in us like a trauma? And so all kinds of rich questions come up out of this. Nothing has a single cause. Everything is causing everything else. So it's so difficult to find and fix problems. And crucially, there is no hierarchy of being in this Buddhist perspective, as is often found in classical Christian theology. And that's what I mean by referencing briefly Thomas Aquinas, the great Roman Catholic Church father of the 13th century in Paris, who shaped his Christian understanding in a really influential way. And for Aquinas, God was the highest reality, and below that was the angels, and below that was man, and then below that was women. Yeah, I'm doing that very deliberately. And then below that were all of the animals, and below that were the plants, and then maybe down below that like bacteria and stuff like that. And with every rung of that hierarchy, there is less and less value and more distance from that which is ultimately valuable and real. So it's brutally sexist, it's human-centric, and it diminishes animals and plants, again, as merely having instrumental value and no inherent or intrinsic value. So there's a lot of good things to say about Thomas Aquinas and Christianity, but we are noticing simply a metaphysical worldview that has really cost us a lot. Vis-a-vis or face-to-face with many, many indigenous traditions that still exist today and have existed throughout human existence, which did not have that vertical hierarchy, which instead had a series of concentric circles. So in many Asian and indigenous communities around the world, there is a sense that human beings are not superior to any other creature. In fact, we are just a part of the natural world in a series of interconnected systems of mutual support. And in many Native American traditions, and this is true in the African continent as well, you have this view that human beings are inferior to the host animal, the main hunted animal of that particular people. And those animals, like, let's say, the buffalo for the Lakota in the American Midwest, those animals were understood to be superior to humans, divine envoys sent by the Great Mother, offered as willing sacrificial victims in order that we might live. So imagine the consciousness of a being born into that society, how they would regard animals, to the consciousness of the hunters who, in 10 short years, slaughtered all the buffalo from the trains with their high-powered rifles, went into the field, cut the tongues out, cut the hide off, and sold them in the marketplace. And in 10 years, decimated the central sacred religion and food source of the Lakota and all of the Plains Indians. So that's a pretty dramatic example of how culture comes from these religious or these philosophical perspectives. And that dualism versus non-dualism, where are we one with nature or are we separate from it? And are we called by God to lord over it and to own it and to control it? So this is something I thought we needed to consider for a few minutes here as we think through our relationship with the natural world. Now, as I shared with the United Methodist Church community, frankly, I think in Christianity we have an opportunity for growth in this regard. I've tried to put it as softly as I could. And by the way, I'm not, the boss of anybody, and it's already happening long before I came along. There are plenty of Christian communities who understand all of this intrinsically. And so this isn't this religion bad, that religion good. That is a grotesque oversimplification of the work we're doing right now. So if some of you are feeling some anger and resentment against Christianity, maybe put a pause on that and keep it open. Let's go ahead and put up the next one.
Can you just name a Christian society that does have this all-inclusive view?
Can I mention a particular group? Well, I can do better than that. Because in almost every Christian group you name, there are subcategories of people doing the work. Even evangelical Christians, who are kind of, the far right, most conservative view, like Southern Baptists, for example, who you might expect would have the most kind of instrumental view of the natural world and the shortest view of history and so on. But there is plenty of evidence in Hebrew Scripture and in the New Testament that we are to be stewards of the world. And stewardship is a rich word. It means caretake. It means ensure the survival of. It means to ensure the well-being thereof. So that's a far cry from vulture capitalism, which might come in and just strip a region of its resources to put money in five people's pockets. So that's the good news, is that this environmentalism that a lot of us have grown up with. I started learning about it when I was in 7th grade. I had a biology teacher who was really into it, and that was in the 70s, and Earth Day was invented in the 70s. I'm from Ventura, and Union 76 oil derrick blew up and wrecked all of our beaches. It was the first major oil spill on the West Coast, and then Earth Day was invented, and then all of a sudden everybody started recycling and on and on and on, and now government regulation, and having catalytic converters on our cars and all of those things are policy, awkward policy attempts to save our lives, to save the world. So it's sprinkled around. And I know in many faith communities, they're pretty forward about this effort, about stewardship of nature. Go ahead and just put up the whole thing. So there's our friend, the great Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Buddhist monk. As I mentioned before, instead of using the word being, he would always swap it out for inter-being. There's nothing that has separate being from anything else. And so that all of us are these vibrant clusters of cells, new cells being replicated, old cells sloughing off, exchanging material with the world around us all the time. And this non-dualistic perspective is, by the way, also reflected, this is interesting, I think, in a lot of indigenous languages, like the Navajo, who call themselves the Dine. So this is the indigenous people of northern Arizona, southern Utah, northern New Mexico, the Shiprock, Grand Canyon, Monument Valley area. And so the Dine have an interesting language. I don't speak the language, but I read an article about it. So I'll share that with you. I learned about this when I was a student in religious studies. I was a religious studies major at UC Santa Barbara in the early 80s, and I was in a class called Native American Spirituality, and we read some amazing anthropological work, and that's where I first learned about this. So the Navajo language has almost no nouns. And as you know, language kind of shapes how concepts are formed. So you and I, if you grew up speaking English as I did, your brain was constructed around the concept of nouns. A noun is a person, place, or thing, like chair, or sky, or man, or woman, or deer, or rock, or ground, or tree, or whatever. That the world is full of fixed objects. Like if I say the word tree to you, you immediately know what I'm referring to. But notice also, I'm not referring to any particular living thing. I'm referring to a disembodied conceptual box in which exist Joshua trees and Christmas trees and money trees at a wedding and petrified trees and pear trees and all of that. There's no specificity, there's no life. It's divorced from the world of change. And it gives you this illusion that of solidity and immutability or changelessness. Now, imagine being born into a Navajo community, pre-conquest, pre-boarding schools, and learning the DNA language from your family, a language that has almost no nouns, that is made up almost entirely of verbs. So instead of a tree, it would be called a treeing. Because which moment of the tree's life do you want to freeze? The seed? The little seedling that comes up? The young soft tree? The big mature tree? The toppled over a dead tree? The decomposing tree? Which moment do you want to stop? And of course the Navajo are like, well, we're not going to do that. We're going to refer to the tree not as a thing, but as a process. Imagine languaging all being as process instead of objects. You can't own a process. There's no concept of private property. Everything changes. I know it's difficult to do because we're so acculturated into our native language and the thought system that comes from that. So when you're hiking with your friends and you're hiking along a river and you come to a bend and there's a whirlpool, and you say to your friends, wow, look at this whirlpool, that's really cool. Look at the leaves getting sucked down in, and hey, help me pick up this whirlpool and put it in the back of my truck. We'll take it home and put it in my garden, or better yet, donate it to the San Diego Vedanta Monastery. Almost called you the other place. And that would be, imagine a whirlpool in this garden back here. Now, so obviously you can't do that because a whirlpool is not a thing. It's an event. A whirlpool, and maybe we should call it a whirlpooling. Whirlpooling is something that can't exist apart from the river. In fact, it's something, let's say, rivering. The The whirlpooling is something that the rivering is doing. And the rivering is something that the streamings are doing. And the streamings is something that the raining is doing. And the raining is something that the clouding is doing. And the clouding is something that the oceaning is doing. And the oceaning is something that the riverings are doing. And how do you separate anything from anything? So when you sort of sit with those and slow down for a minute, you realize that Buddhist idea of interdependency, of mutual arising, mutual causation, means that there really is never any separation between anything except conceptually. Yeah, and as I mentioned, what Thich Nhat Hanh would do. So that's the connection. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So what if this afternoon, I know you're all going to go on a walk, right? After this, and you're going to have to, and go. It could be in the courtyard of your apartment, or you could shoot up to Mount Laguna, and whatever you want to do. But when you're out there, this question of the Buddha, what is the meaning of a flower? It's the wrong question. That it's an experience, not a thing. Go ahead, please. Yeah, you can put all that up. Alles verganglich ist nur ein Gleichnis. Oh, my German's terrible, forgive me. I won't torture you with that again, but this idea I thought was an interesting piece to add in as well. So there's the great Johannes Wolfgang von Goethe, 1789, 49, 1832. Wonderful, he's the Shakespeare of Germany, right? He's one of these synthetic thinkers, poet, writer, philosopher. Goethe's idea here is that everything is a foreground of a background. Everything is a metaphor. And this sprang to mind as I was thinking about the Buddhist idea of the flower sermon. That everything transitory is a metaphor, and all that is fleeting is an analogy, a likeness or a simile or a parable for the sacred formless depth hidden from us by the surface world of objects. It was in the song that you sang for us this morning. That even under the struggles of the world, there is a peace within. But we don't feel it when we're caught in the struggles, of course. But there's a sense in which it's always there. And Plato, the great Greek philosopher, 400 BC, shaped it this way. You might remember from school the allegory of the cave. That the idea, again, a parable, right? Socrates, speaking for Plato, tells a little story. He says, imagine our human existence like this. Imagine a group of men born in a cave, staring at the back wall of the cave, upon which shadows are being projected from a fire behind them, and these other guys back here are holding up cutouts that are casting shadows on the wall. And these poor souls that are chained in this cave, they think the shadows are real. They have no idea that the shadow of the tree that they see on the wall is being cast by the wooden cutout of a tree carried behind them, and that outside the cave there's real trees. So Plato gives us this kind of multi-layered thing. The world of perception, what in Hinduism we call Maya, the world of perception and the concepts we form about those perceptions, they're not false, it's just that they serve as a kind of veil behind which lies a deeper reality, a deeper interbeing. And of course, it's all connected. There's no separation, but that's the sense from these different traditions. And so the insight from people like Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell is that wherever you go, there is, in every culture, the idea of a supreme being that gets conceptualized differently everywhere. So Joseph Campbell gives us this useful idea that all God concepts are like a mask that we hang on eternity. And here in the Vedanta and in the wider Hindu tradition of the Sanatana Dharma, with its through a Western lens, it looks pretty polytheistic. Lots of gods and goddesses. In fact, even the gods and goddesses of other traditions are sometimes pulled in as many faces of the one. And there's that simultaneous, my students ask me, is Hinduism polytheistic or monotheistic? And I just say, yes. And then we have some fun trying to unpack all of that, but there's this sense in which, of course, there's a singular underlying being that takes form as all kinds of different masks. And Campbell, I think in a useful way, says, yeah, that's what God images are. And there's these beautiful shrines around the room, that our idea of God is just that. It's our idea. And it comes from our culture, our sociology, our environment. The Navajo's gods are local animals, coyote and raven, and then you go to the South Pacific and their gods are sea turtles and dolphins. You draw from the environment. And in the Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, you kind of move into a monotheistic emphasis, and in fact the God becomes imageless in Islam. In the Quran we read about the 99 names of God, but in the Sufi tradition of mystical Islam, the real name of God is the 100th, which is silence. And then we're back in the Tao Te Ching, where Lao Tzu says that the Tao is the nameless. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao, Lao Tzu tells us. And so our concepts are just that, our concepts. And the problems, according to Joseph Campbell, arise when we forget that we made the masks. And that they're lovely and they're beautiful and they direct our attention in a certain reason and they pull our hearts and our minds into synthesis. As we experience deeper and deeper the mystery beyond all concepts, beyond all masks. So that's that sense that I shared earlier about religion and mythology in Campbell's perspective being not the ultimate, but the penultimate, and the masks matter, but ultimately are to be transcended, to realize ultimate reality beyond all masks, metaphors, images, and concepts. That when we apprehend nature or the world or each other with the proper preparation and attitude, literally everything becomes the portal through which we might experience divinity. That's a bold claim. And it's a claim you might not hear as often here in the West as you hear in the Eastern traditions or in the indigenous traditions. But there is nowhere that God is not. So this whole business of searching for God is sort of a bankrupt. It's like Paul says in one of his letters that God is the ground of being in which we live. So there goes your man in the sky. It's like asking a fish in an aquarium, what is water? They're like, I don't know. We just live. What are you talking about? What's water? And so any gulf we feel between us and ultimate reality is, again, a conceptual problem. I'm often repeating this phrase, that we don't have a proximity problem, we have a perception problem.
So Peter, in Christianity, they say, we are made in God's image.
Yes.
But what you're saying is Joseph Campbell's saying, no, God is made in man's image.
Well, right, that our ideas of God come from us. They come from our culture. And just in one scripture alone, just in the Hebrew and Christian Bible, a thing called the Bible, right? There are so many portraits of God that don't fit together very well. Hateful, vengeful, cruel, and then merciful and nurturing and loving and forgiving. And how to make them all fit together, but you kind of get the God you need. You know, if you're the Hebrews and fighting fighting on 12 sides against all these other cultures, you need a warrior God who's going to help you survive. And when you're Jesus trying to heal people, you need a healing God. And so one of the great resonances I have with the Indian tradition is you get all of these different personifications of the different qualities and attributes of the one. And that's a really beautiful piece. Okay, let's go on. And oh gosh, yeah. I don't know. I guess we have time for this story. I had an epiphany. I had a transcendent experience at the frozen food aisle at Costco. And it was a couple of years ago during Thanksgiving, and I was shopping, and I like shopping. I don't know how much backstory to give here though, but I'm the principal kitchen guy in my marriage, in my family. I do most of the cooking, not all. And that means I'm like a different shopping list in my phone, one for Trader Joe's, one for Costco, one for the supermarket. You know what I'm talking about. I can tell you right now how much is left in all of my spice jars at home. So I like to cook and I like to eat, obviously. And so I'm at Costco. It's a pretty cool experience for me if you have 2.5 hours, because that's what it's going to take. And you just surrender to that and you have a good time. And I'm the guy that walks every aisle because I don't know what's in that store. And they purposely confuse you by changing it constantly. So you have to walk the whole store. It's like IKEA, you can get in, but you can't get out. It's like a Roach Motel. Where is the door? Oh, I guess I do want some Swedish meatballs. And so at Costco, I was walking through the store, and I was just you're just in one of those weird kind of like relaxed, peaceful, kind of decent moods, and it was so crowded, and I was noticing not the anxiety of some of the people, I was noticing the kindness of some of the people, making room for each other, having patience. When somebody leaves their cart in the middle so they can go over and have the sample, and they block the whole aisle, it's like, that's a spiritual practice, man. Are you going to shower them with silent, loving kindness and just wait? Or are you going to move your cart? So I was there and I was just sort of absorbing all of this. And I had this, it's like almost like the hair started standing up on the back of my neck. I had this feeling of, I just fell in love with everybody in the store. And I just saw them all building their family rituals, shopping for their Thanksgivings, trying to put it all together, working through the complexities of their own lives, and this deep sense of mercifulness and loving kindness, and believing this is not how I walk around most of the time. So it was so remarkable in that moment. So it occurred to me as I was leaving the store that there's a Celtic phrase for this, right? That this was a thin place. A thin place in Celtic mysticism is, as you might guess, a place where the spiritual world or the depth reality suddenly shimmers through the surface of things and you experience it. Even in the frozen food aisle in Costco. You don't have to go to a beautiful spiritual place. Go ahead and see. Oh yeah, I stumbled on with thin place. There might even be more, yeah. So anyway, that's what I just said. So yeah, you never know where it's going to hit you. Yeah, go ahead. Put this whole one up, and then we'll start to kind of wrap up here. So, in his classic text, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, the scholar of world mythology and religion, Joseph Campbell, outlines the 17 stages of the hero's journey. We're not going to do that right now. But each of us is understood as the hero of our own lives, and Campbell analyzes all world mythology and storytelling along these lines. So we answer the call, we leave the known world, we go through these ordeals. There's the death of the ego, there's the atonement or the unity with power, there's the attainment of the prize or the boon, and then you return hopefully back to where you started, only now changed, empowered, and in the consciousness of service. And this archetype of the hero's journey kind of runs through every religion, all the prophets, all the teachers. And Campbell calls the third stage at 17 the supernatural aid. So now I'm finally getting to the point here. So after you have said the holy word yes, which is the first stage, answering the call, and then you've got through the second stage, which is the reluctance to answer the call, and then you get to the third one, which is the supernatural aid. You are met with this unexpected support. For Luke Skywalker, it's Obi-Wan Kenobi, comes out of the hills. He's this Jedi guy that's been hanging around, for Frodo, it's Gandalf, etc. For Harry Potter, it's literally like an invisibility cloak or a magic wand. So in all the fantasy stories, it's some external presence. But go ahead and go to the next slide. Let's see. But all those are metaphors, remember Goethe, for how this cosmic support actually shows up. Go ahead to the next one. And just put all of it up. So this is how Campbell expresses it. Protective power is always and ever present within the sanctuary of the heart, and even imminent within or just behind the unfamiliar features of the world. One has only to know and trust, and ageless guardians will appear. Having responded to his or her own call and continuing to follow courageously as the consequences unfold, the hero finds all the forces of the unconscious at their side. Mother Nature herself supports the mighty task. This is an archetype. And Moses is a famous example, right? Manna coming from heaven, the parting of the Red Sea. Somehow when you are penitent enough, when you have enough faith, when you surrender enough, when you're hopeful enough, when you're optimistic enough, that somehow unlocks the gates of the universe's natural capacity to sustain you and to support you. And so that's the sense in which nature becomes an ally. Jesus feeding all those people with loaves and fishes. And this idea from the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus counsels us to put first the kingdom of God, and all else will be given to you. That line is from this famous passage where he's saying, don't worry what you're going to wear. Look at the lilies of the field. Look how beautifully they're adorned, and they don't try to look pretty. Don't you think that God is looking after you? The birds, they don't sow, they don't reap. Everything grows like grass and is tomorrow thrown into the furnace. You're not in charge. Everything is working together to support you, and they suggest that maybe our spiritual practice is the most important economic policy that we can have. That's a provocative possibility. So the unlocking trigger, though, is the consciousness with which we show up. In some traditions, we might call it faith, hope, trust, the willingness to take risks. Go ahead and move forward, please, and put all those up. Just a couple of thoughts about this, too, that, in the hero's journey narratives of Buddha and Jesus, we find a lot of parallels. There's a miraculous birth, answering the call, born from a keen awareness of the suffering of the world, the three temptations, that's in both stories. There's threshold guardians that get in the way, overcoming temptations, entering the higher realm, and then teaching and healing from that higher mode of consciousness. And in both stories, at the moment of crisis, of ego death, after the initiation, they both go into the wilderness. When Jesus is baptized by John the Baptist, and when Siddhartha endures his three temptations, they go into the wilderness. And the wilderness becomes this lived reality and metaphor for standing aside from the busyness of the commercial world, the machinations of human society, preoccupied as it typically is with acquisition, power, and the fulfillment of our endless needs and longings. And how liberating it is to step out of that for a moment and touch into something deeper and more universal, to go into this vast quiet, beyond words, beyond concepts, beyond ideologies, beyond all human constructions and conventions and systems, is to step closer to that which is real. Call it God, Dharmakaya, Brahman, Atman, Tao, etc. Go ahead. My wife and I just spent a week in the Abrego 2 weeks ago now. And it's just remarkable to drive out into some nameless wash and get out of the car and just walk for a while and be in the wind. It's really quite stunning. Go ahead and put up the rest of it. So just touching into, again, the Christian tradition out of very early Christianity, largely in Egypt, grew this monastic tradition. It wasn't invented there. There were already monastic traditions in India and throughout the world, but it starts in the Christian tradition there. Go ahead and click the rest. Yeah. So the Desert Fathers and Mothers, as early as the 2nd century, really, were doing what indigenous peoples all over the earth have been doing for millennia. Vision questing alone, apart from all traditional support systems, stripping themselves of everything known and familiar, and thereby reordering their consciousness into the shape of deep alignment with the sacred depths just beneath the surface of all things. So from St. Anthony, there's a through line to St. Benedict and all of the other orders that grew up in the Western and Eastern Christian traditions. Go ahead and put up the next slide, please. Yeah, put up the whole thing. So there's the great Sufi poet Rumi in his poem, The Great Wagon. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. So like mystics of all traditions, Jewish mystics, Christian mystics, and Islamic mystics, and of course throughout the Indian and East Asian and indigenous traditions all over the world, this mystical perspective that the reality is out beyond concepts, this is a powerful expression of that. Go ahead and keep on pushing through the rest of this. Martin Buber, I just wrote a new piece for this for my Substack. Martin Buber, the great 19th and 20th century Jewish philosopher, talks about our relationship with each other. And in Buber's Jewish conception, God exists in the space between us, but only when we meet each other authentically. Only when we regard the other as a thou and not as an it. That God is absent from any I-it relationship. When we view the other person as what can they do for me? As a means to an end for my attainment of some goal that I want. That's the I-it relationship. What happens when we view nature as an it? What can I get out of it? What is it going to do for me? But when we regard the other, or when we regard the natural world as a thou, in Buber's Jewish theology, that's when divinity becomes present. God is only present in the I-thou relationship. So again, this really rich idea that the way we organize our consciousness is how we access the divine. That God doesn't ever hide from us, except in this sense that I can cut out the real or the divine or the sacred by getting stuck in false thinking. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Speaking of Judaism, there's this wonderful Hebrew phrase that comes to us from the Kabbalah tradition, tikkun olam, which means literally to heal the world. That in Jewish consciousness, there is this moral obligation, what we might in Hinduism call our dharma, our duty, our moral obligation, to be an agent of healing in the world. In any way that you can, in tiny ways, in just inside of one relationship, or the way we talk to a child, or the way we pick up trash in the park, or in some larger way. But tikkun olam is how God continues the creation, because God doesn't have hands, but we do. And God doesn't have a mouth, but I do, and I can speak out against injustice. And so in Jewish consciousness, human agency is the conduit through which God continues the creation of the world. That's how important it is. That's how important us showing up is. Go ahead and go to the next one. I think we're about to wrap up here. What I have not given you, yeah, go ahead and put up this little slide. I've not given you a lot. I've not given you any specific policy suggestions. I've not given you encyclopedic information about how each of the world's metaphysical, spiritual, philosophical, religious, biblical traditions all concretely address our current climate crisis. But I am convinced that right action arises on its own accord when right understanding and right mindfulness are present and activated. We will know what to do when we better understand who we are. And when we prayerfully, meditatively, and deeply rest in the question, instead of rushing off into answers, we will find ourselves guided by Holy Spirit, Dharmakaya, the Great Mother, the divinity of our own authentic natures, which thinking cuts out. So there is no one path to earth restoration. Everything is causing everything else. Instead, as individuals and as intentional groups, we take steps toward healing, toward understanding, and toward cooperation with the natural forces that sustain us. I'm optimistic. I'm a fool, maybe, but I'm hopeful that there is, like Sam tells Frodo in the Two Towers, nerd out with me here for a second, the second book of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, that when Frodo's defeated, Sam says, there's still good in the world. There is still something worth fighting for. I know you don't see it right now. I know you don't feel it. The despair is overwhelming. And then I take a breath and I remember, well, Sam is right. Go ahead to the next slide. There is. So this Latin phrase always keeps me on track. Solvitur ambulando. It means it is solved by walking. And I don't literally mean, let's all have a nice walk now around the neighborhood, which is a beautiful neighborhood. But maybe even beyond that. Of course, it is solved by getting outside under a sky. But maybe even beyond that, the idea that I don't have to have all the information before I start taking actions. That I don't have a I don't have to have a perfect, flawless solution before I take step one. Maybe I begin to muddle forward and find a path that's less harmful than the path I'm currently on. Even though I drove an internal combustion engine powered vehicle to get here. What if we take perfection off the table? What if we take purity off the table? Maybe you're not a big fan of Elon Musk, but that Tesla is cleaning the air. Maybe you don't like Jeff Bezos, and you think Amazon is a disaster, and in many ways it is, because it's destroying a structure, namely big box stores. And I thought I used to be really a terrible person because I ordered a single Band-Aid from Amazon, and a big truck came down the street and dropped the single Band-Aid. But then I realized, you know what, there's 14 Amazon trucks going up and down my street every day. The dude can drop off a Band-Aid. He's already going up and down my street every day. And then you read that 60% of the sellers on Amazon are home businesses. That in rural communities all over the world, families are surviving by creating tiny businesses and selling on the biggest marketplace in the world. I'm an unknown first-time author, self-published. 60% of my books are sold on Amazon, most of them as Kindles. So I have to make peace with Amazon. And I'm on Facebook and I see some of my friends saying, delete your Amazons, delete your Amazon. He's an oligarch. I'm like, yeah, he is an oligarch. And Elon Musk, don't get me started. We are in the muddy world. And I love boycotts. Boycotts are powerful, but when you do a boycott, you hurt a lot of innocent people. Gandhi knew this when he called for the boycott of all British clothing and cotton said, we're gonna start growing our own cotton, we're gonna start dressing like Indians again. What's with all these tweeds? We're in India, for God's sakes. And everybody started dressing Indian again, and it decimated the economy of England. All those working class families thrown into starvation because their export market to India disappeared. And Gandhi knew this. He knew that boycotting English cotton and fabric was going to hurt real people, but you do it anyway. It's the battlefield that Krishna counsels us through in the Bhagavad Gita. We must fight. We must sacrifice. People are going to get hurt, but it's all for truth. And none of us is in charge. And we have this moral obligation and that sense of walking forward. So I think that's the last slide. And so we can just leave that one up or go blank, whatever you want to do. And I've gone a little over, but we have time for some Q&A. So let me get back behind the podium and I'll hand this microphone to you, Swami. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you,
So if you like a beautiful talk, Peter, beautiful. So if you'd like to ask any questions, please do so now. Just raise your hand and then wait for the mic.
Yeah, we'd like your question or comment on the microphone so folks at home can also hear that. That was a lot, huh? Oh, Kathy, yeah.
Hi, my name is Kathy. I'm part of another sangha, and thrilled to be here. I'm part of today's sangha in Vista.
Beautiful.
And this has been the most amazing gathering that, I mean, I've been to a lot of Peter's
Sure.
gatherings, and I'm starting a small group on the book on Wednesday. Peter
See you
will be
Wednesday
at my
night,
home.
that's right.
But I just want to know, I mean, you're still young compared to some people.
To somebody, yeah, we all are.
Where do you get your energy? You're so involved and passionate and approach it so beautifully. Where do you get your energy?
Really? Okay, that's the question. Okay. Coffee helps. No, I don't know, Kat. That's a lovely question. I don't know the answer. I just live my life like you all are doing, as best I can. I'm here for 90 minutes. You know, I put on my face, right? This is me being on. I don't walk around the house like this. You know, I'm just like, or I'm, you know, living much more quietly than this, but I love this work so much. And so when I come into a space and with all these beautiful people and whoever is in the digital space right now with us, to me, there's a lot at stake. There's a lot riding on this. To me, this just matters. It just does. And I, like you, am kind of fed up with how sometimes shallow and vapid life can be. And, you know, I'm terrible at small talk. I want to get right past the weather to, what do you think about death? No, not exactly, but you know, I've always been drawn to those kinds of things, and so I am excited about coming into a space like this and sharing time and with people who are clearly also, like me, weirdly drawn to inquiries like this. And so I think the energy just comes from that. You know, there's another Rumi line that I often think of and I often share with my students when they ask me, you know, what should I major in or what should I do with my life? I always drop this Rumi line on them. Let yourself be silently drawn by the pull of what you really love. I don't know if that's very good career advice, but, you know, make practical decisions, but have on the table also that idea that question of, as you're figuring out what your college major should be or what you should do with your life, don't just think about making money. Money is important. You should get some. It's really helpful. But while you're doing that, also, what makes your eyes light up? I had a teacher ask me once when I was trying to ask them for help on these questions, and they said, well, if success was guaranteed and money was no object, what would you do with your life? That kind of blew my mind. If success was guaranteed and if money were no object, what would you spend your days doing? And that's a kind of a way of cutting aside all my fear, all my anxiety about survival, and tapping into what my authentic dharma is, my authentic nature or essence or purpose, and then somehow cleverly find a way to weave that into the practical things I have to do. I'm so sorry, I just poured water on your rug. Oh my goodness. That's hopefully part of it. And maybe short answer, long question. Maybe that's kind of what you're seeing, Kathy. I don't know, something like that. Yeah, thank you. And please, somebody else. Anybody have a thought? Yes, we'll run the mic over to you, Glenna. Thank you.
Well, it's just a comment that
Yes.
I listened to the Hidden Brain podcast with
Yes.
Shankar Vedanta,
Thank you.
and he's an amazing guy and talks about so many wonderful subjects. And
Hidden brain.
the point that he was making is that partly because of environmental factors and the internet, that this younger generation, certainly younger than me, are getting so overwhelmed with despair because of the environment, because of everything that's going on.
Yes.
And as an extreme, that many of them are not only doing the drugs and alcohol and all that, but they're setting themselves on fire, to make a point that, we can't do this anymore.
Yeah. Thank you.
And he basically said, don't look at what you think is perfection, because you'll never get there.
Yeah.
Start with one small thing.
Yeah.
And do that the best you can, and
Yes.
then reevaluate, and then go on. And
Yeah.
it's basically saying the same thing that you were just talking
Yeah.
about too.
What's that title, that book title?
It's a podcast.
Oh,
It's
sorry.
The Hidden Brain.
The Hidden Brain. Oh, yeah. I have heard of that.
It's wonderful.
Thank you.
NPR.
NPR. Okay, thank you. Oh, yeah. I am familiar with that. Thank you. That's really helpful. And thanks for cleaning up around my mess. I usually don't just throw things around like that. But I often think of that line, perfection is the enemy of the good. And as someone who's very interested in politics, I think about it a lot in regards to politics. I gave a talk recently called State of the Union with Chip Franklin at San Diego Oasis, and we started the talk off with, I asked for 10 people to come up from the audience and stand on stage, and we just lined them up. And I took the 3 people on the end and I made them stand separately. And I took the 3 people on the other end and I made them stand separately. So you had 3 people, a group of 4 in the middle, and then 3 people. So try to visualize that. And then I pointed out that these 10 people represent all eligible voters in the United States, the electorate, about 200 million people. The 3 on the end voted for Donald Trump. That's 31%. The people on this end voted for Kamala Harris, 30%. 38%, those middle 4, did not vote. And so that's how we got here. In other words, having Donald Trump in the White House, only 3 out of 10 of us asked for that. Only 3 out of 10 of us want that. 7 out of 10 of us did not choose this. And I think about that every morning when I get up, to remember who we are, what we are, because I'm I don't know who you voted for. There's different perspectives in here. Obviously, you can tell where I'm coming from. I'm with the 7. And I'm with the 3 actually on the end. But that's, as I argued with people over these last years about who to vote for last November, I often heard the most vicious criticism of Kamala Harris and Tim Walz coming from fellow Democrats, from fellow progressives. Gaza kind of blew everything up. A lot of especially young voters despise Kamala Harris because she's part of the Biden administration, which is funding the Israeli war against the Palestinian people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It is effed up in all directions. And so why would I want to participate in that? So among my college students, 18 to 24, their voter turnout is about 20%. 8 out of 10 of them just like, I don't have time for that. That's the old people's mess. What does it have to do with me? And it breaks my heart because literally if just a couple more people had come out, we'd be living in a really different world today. And I can't spend time lamenting that. So I think that's such a rich conversation for us all to kind of think about perfection.
But that's also an incredible visualization about the voter turnout and how that has totally affected the politics.
It really helps me because I'm tired of hearing about 50% of us wanted this and 50%, it's not 50-50, it's not even close to 50-50. So that's just bad math. I'm not even a math guy and it makes me mad, you know? Yeah. Anyway, so no, that's a beautiful point. Any other thoughts before we kind of wind down? Please, can we get you on the microphone for the folks at home?
It's somewhat a different question. This morning when I opened your book to have something to look at before you come, my eyes fell on a quote that says, "It's never too late to have a happy childhood." And we have
Oh, you're talking about my book. She's plugging my book and it went right by me.
It's not
Appreciate
your
that.
personal quote, but
No,
you
it's
chose it.
Tom
And
Robbins,
this
yes.
just perfectly fits a situation we had in my family. This Christmas time, my daughter-in-law's mother had a stroke. She had been a neglectful mother who only saw the bad in her children. And after the stroke in the hospital, she had 3 weeks where she came back to being the loving person she could have been. And my daughter wrote, daughter-in-law, but she's my daughter too.
I get
She
it.
wrote a eulogy where she brought out all the good stuff about her mother.
Yeah.
And I don't know how she did this, but is that what you mean with this?
Oh, okay. Yeah, you're referring to my book, The 7-Stone Path, An Everyday Journey to Wisdom, available now on Amazon and where all books are sold. I didn't bring any with me today. That was stupid. But yeah, there's a Tom Robbins quote, a wonderful novelist, Tom Robbins. It's never too late to have a happy childhood. And that's a whole chapter about happiness and joy. So yeah, that's a fascinating window, isn't it? And thank you for that story. It's powerful. Swami?
Let me ask one question in your class.
You have to do it on the mic.
Okay, yes.
Don't you know anything?
Yes, thank you.
It's only your place, you know.
No,
Please.
it's not my place, but
Well, they let you
I
live
just stay here. I'm one of the caretakers.
There you go. There you go.
A steward. When you're talking about that, the idea of the everything being interconnected.
Yeah.
What's the term you used?
Interdependent origination, that Buddhist
Right,
term?
yeah. And so I thought it was really interesting. There's a concept, in Vedanta about, we don't pay a lot of attention about the origination, like how things originate.
Right.
The concept, and they'll use the analogy like you're waking up from a dream.
Yeah.
You're just here. You wake up from a dream, you're just here. How you arrived here, you're not sure, but you're just here.
Yeah.
In the same way, when you talk about this interdependency, you use the whole analogy, the water, the rain,
Yeah.
whatever, and it's just interesting that it's like you just awaken to this interdependence. You're not sure how, but everything is interdependent. I'm saying, how does that compare to like point A becoming point B, becoming point C, point D, like the causal effect, like
Yeah.
from one thing led to this point of origin, led to everything.
Yeah.
The way you were just describing it is like from what we call purely a Dwaitic view.
Yeah. Ooh.
You wake up into the reality, you find yourself in this, where you are. And
Yeah.
there's this sort of interpretation like, I must have had it yesterday, or a previous, but I just find myself here in the present moment. And everything is interconnected.
Yeah.
It
Right.
wasn't just like, compared to like, let's say, a big bang and then one thing leads to this, leads
Yeah.
to this, leads to this. So I just found that fascinating
Yeah.
about how, just a way that, how we lead our lives and just like the origination. Any thoughts
Absolutely.
about that?
No, it's really true. Yeah, I think it's a helpful analytical exercise to think about linear causation.
Yeah, right.
We've all set up the dominoes, right?
Right.
And you knock one and knocks it. So it's all very single cause, single effect, and just like a chain
Right.
of events. But there's this wonderful Indian image of Indra's net. So imagine a net, like a spider web, that the cosmos is a net, and at the intersection of every line, there's a drop of water, there's a little bead of water. And each bead of water reflects all of the other beads of water. It's this beautiful image
Right.
of deep interconnectedness and that nothing exists without everything else existing. And then I'm, just because of my particular personality or orientation, whatever, I bring it down to the ethical, that there is no me without you. And that if we have, then I have. And if I have, then you have. I know that's called Marxism by political pundits these days, but it's the fundamental human truth, and it's the fundamental natural truth that weird doctrines like the concept of private property interfere with. That sense of mutuality, that we live in a mutually binding web of being. Martin Luther King talked about that. And so he had been hanging around with Thich Nhat Hanh quite a bit the last 2 years of his life. Maybe that's kind of where he picked it up. And that's where he also learned a lot about the Vietnam War, was from Thich Nhat Hanh. And that's the reason King got killed, probably, because he, not for his civil rights work, but his anti-war work.
Right.
But anyway, yeah, these are just different ways of thinking, aren't they?
Right.
The linear chain of causation,
Right.
the Indra's web, interdependency, and it's useful to try them on and see what society you decide to build as a result of your concepts. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Oh, I love coming here. This is a brilliant group. Always wonderful. Thank you so much. PeterBolland.com if you ever want to see anything more about me or any of the other stuff I do. I guess we're done. Should I grab
So let
my?
me make an announcement, and then we'll have, Peter Donald, he's a gifted orator, but he's also a gifted musician.
Okay.
So as for our closing prayer, we're going to have a closing song. So I'll just make maybe a few announcements before we end off here. One is that, so this is the Vedanta side in San Diego. We do have weekly lectures on Saturdays at 11 o'clock. Next week, can you see what the topic is? Next week, we have Swami Vedananda, who will be speaking on the topic of Sri Ramakrishna's humor. Sri Ramakrishna is our, we think of as an incarnation of God. As Peter was mentioning, there's different, when you look around the different, there's one divine presence, and from one point of view has seen through different lenses. So you're seeing here, there's all these are different paths leading. Judaism, we have Islam, we have Christianity, we have Buddhism, Hinduism, there's the Native American tradition, there's Taoism, there's Sikhism. There's just a glance of the many different traditions that are just like different, rivers leading to the one ultimate ocean.
Riverines.
Riverines, that's right, the verb, I love what he's talking about. So religion is just a verb, it's a process, getting you to that ultimate reality which is beyond process. So anyways, so 11 o'clock and we have weekly lectures, and so I'm going to close off with just a traditional chant, and then I'm going to have Peter close us off with a song. Om Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Havir Avir Maiti Rudrayate Dakshinam Mukham Te Namam Pahi Nityam Te Namam Pahi Nityam Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from death to immortality. O Lord, shine through and through, and ever protect us with thy compassionate grace. Oh, peace, peace, peace to all beings everywhere. This quote is from the oldest Upanishad, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which is the oldest Upanishad, depending like at least 2,000 to 4,000, let's say BC, depending on who you look at. But it's also can be found. Anybody seen The Matrix? The movie The Matrix, the trilogy? The third trilogy. This is the closing song that they give when they show the credits. So
I didn't know that. I forgot that. Thank you.
thank you. And you don't anyway.
I guess so. I wrote this song last fall after the election and before Thanksgiving. I was hearing from a lot of friends, like, what do we do now, that kind of thing. And I started thinking about, us as a circle of friends. And so this song came out of that. There's grief in the gravy, the tears in the wine. There's longing in the candlelight, as powerful as time, that pulls you toward the end of things and further from the start. When everything was new, true blue hearts. Here is where we are, alive and in this place. To long for something more is such a sad and silly waste. And this is who we are, and these are our hands, alone together in the night, this circle of friends. Now there's a sadness over us that muffles all the words that used to bring us comfort neath this scattering of birds. Deep down in the darkness, there's still a little light, hidden by a shadow that it casts into the night. And here is where we are, alive and in this place. To long for something more is such a sad and silly waste. And this is who we are, and these are our hands, alone together in the night, this circle of friends. Everything we used to know is slipping through our hands. The things we thought we figured out, we still don't understand. And
Wisdom took our tongues and left us nothing much to say. But here is where we are, alive and in this place. To long for something more is such a ridiculous waste. And this is who we are, and these are our hands. We're building it together now, this circle of friends, circle of friends, circle of friends.
Thank you.
Wow, Peter, you're getting better.